Whether he would borrow from recent tweets, make dire threats to North Korea, echo some of the name calling the campaign, or restate the America First platform he campaigned and won on, you can rest easy. That's what he did. Today, making his first speech to the UN General Assembly, he did all that to the point it left some delegates taken aback and caused emotional reaction in the chamber, apparently, as a senior UN official put it to our Jim Sciutto. Here's a small sample.
As President of the United States, I will always put America first. Just like you, as the leaders of your countries, will always and should always put your countries first. If the righteous many do not confront the wicked few, then evil will triumph. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
Well, the president also put Iran on notice, calling the multilateral nuclear deal the U.S. is a party to, quote, an embarrassment to the United States. He said some nations were, in his words, going to hell. The speech set off a wave of reaction across the political spectrum. From the left, The Atlantic's Peter Beinart writes it turned President Obama's foreign policy vision on its head. On the right, the National Review's Rich Lowry opened his piece with this, quote, as someone said on Twitter, never before has been there so much murmuring of holy expletive in so many different languages. With that in mind, I want to get New York Times' columnist Tom Friedman's take. He's the best-selling author, most recently, of Thank You for Being Late, An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. Tom, overall, I'm wondering what you made of the president's speech today.
Well, yeah, it's a worldview that I just don't share, Anderson. The worldview that the president articulated is America first. And I think we became a prosperous and secure country ever since World War II in particular by being America the most connected. And I think in a world where networks are basically becoming the center of our lives and what flows through that network, ideas, trade, opportunity. The country that's most connected to the most networks is the country that's going to be the most thriving and the most secure. And I just don't agree with the president's point of view. I also think the speech was larded with contradictions. Others have pointed this out. You know, the president says now, you know, the first thing is sovereignty. Countries have to respect each other's sovereignty. And one really is tempted to ask President Trump, really? We had the biggest nonviolent attack on our sovereignty by Russia during the last election, according to our three leading intelligence agencies, that our country's ever experienced, and he is yet to really condemn that. And the other contradiction is he basically signaled that he wants to rip up the Iran deal and apparently intends to do so, the Iran nuclear deal, one that has denuclearizes Iran effectively, prevents it from getting a nuclear weapon for 15 years essentially. And at the same time, we're going to persuade North Korea to voluntarily give up its nuclear weapons. If you're sitting in North Korea and you see that the United States struck a deal with Iran, Iran gave up its nuclear option, and now the United States wants to tear that up, that's not going to really work in great harmony with your North Korea diplomacy. So that's my general reaction.
This notion of America first, and I mean, you know, it sort of echoes something else he said during the campaign about kind of not dictating to other countries or not sort of being certainly the world's policeman, but also not sort of trying to change or nation build in other countries. Is that something which, do you think he actually believes that? Because, I mean, obviously there are many countries where the U.S. is involved with and is trying to dictate terms on how they should behave and what they should do.
Yeah, it's just not particularly thought out. Obviously, we're telling the Iranians how to behave, but we're not telling the Saudis how to behave. And, you know, both of them have problematic domestic issues as far as we're concerned, and even international ones. So none of it, Anderson, feels deeply thought out to me. It starts with a kind of you know, catchphrase, America first, and then it attempts to build a kind of global foreign policy around it. It doesn't strike me as very deep, and it flies in the face of how we built a world that has been largely peaceful, if one looks at the broad span of world history, and made us largely prosperous ever since World War II. It argues that there is a completely different approach. I understand. What do you think are the odds that every one of our statesmen, since our greatest statesmen since World War II, who built American prosperity and security on the idea of making a much more inclusive world shaped around our values and really our interests, that they got it all wrong, but Donald Trump and Breitbart got it right.
You know, there are some supporters of Trump who will listen to what he said about North Korea and say, well, look, you know, maybe this kind of threat, it will work. I mean, nothing else seems to have worked, they would point out, through multiple administrations which have tried kind of different tactics on this.
Well, you know, I want to take up that specific point because I think there they have a point. I don't, Rocket Man is kind of juvenile, but whatever, maybe behind it is a feeling that we need to shrink this guy, you know, in North Korea, not build him up. So, you know, put a nickname on him and making him afraid of what Trump may or may not do. I don't have a problem with that. The real question is there a long-term strategy other than living with North Korea with a nuclear bomb? Are we really ready to go to war over that? I just don't know. I sense so, Anderson, in what the president said, what I've heard Mattis say in the last 24 hours, we may be approaching a point where we will say to the North Koreans, the next rocket you test, the next ballistic missile you test near one of our allies, particularly China and South Korea, we are going to take out the launcher. And then you put the North Koreans in a situation where they have to decide if they retaliate by taking out the launcher, they are beginning a process that could end up indeed in their own suicide. The one thing that has made me, you know, slightly, somewhat hopeful that this doesn't have to come to a violent solution in the Korean Peninsula is the fact that North Korea is a three-generation dynasty. It's now been ruled by 3 generations of the same family. That suggests to me that this family is not suicidal, it's homicidal. And I do believe that gives us some room for maneuver. I wouldn't bet the wife and kids on it, but it does suggest that at the end of the day, these guys aren't in the business of committing suicide.
Tom Friedman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're following closely the